I'm not exactly clear just how strong the Iranian regime is right now. Now, you can look at a map of Iran and you can look at an ethnic breakdown of Iran. And if you are a neocon, you start to salivate because Iran is not a monolithic state. It is a mountain country. This is not the type of country, to your point, that you invade easily. It's the time that you get stuck in a mountain valley and you either get assimilated by whoever's locally there or you have to tuck tail and return home. And the way that Iran or ancient Persian empires expanded was never by direct conquest. It was always by giving goodies to vassal states all the way out to the Mediterranean. And in that sense, the way that this version of Iran was trying to do things, the way it was so heavy-handed with Assad and with Hezbollah, it really wasn't good strategy. And you can see how it's just blown up in their faces. Part of me, though, wonders, and this is, I think, where the Fordo strike might actually matter. If the U.S. comes in and obliterates Fordo with, the biggest bombs, and Trump starts talking about the biggest bombs in the history of man, I wonder if that's the last leg of legitimacy gone for Iran, because then this government has spent all this treasure abroad, spent all this Iranian blood abroad. It doesn't have a nuke to show for it. It doesn't have economic prosperity. It just has isolation and pain. And at that point, do the Iranian people say, after all this, you didn't even have a nuke? You can't even protect us from Israel? 10 million people taking over the skies and bombing us into oblivion? Like this regime can't hold. And then maybe you get an overthrow. And I think this is the real neocon fever dream. There's sort of that point to it as well. I think you're right that the idea that it's going to...
Yeah, so okay, look, there is one case where airstrikes led to regime change. And it's my homeland of Serbia. 1999 rolls along, and for 3 months, NATO pounds Serbia through punitive airstrikes. It was supposed to be military only, but the Serbian military did not turn on their air defense systems, which was very, very smart, very, very dangerous for the population of Serbia. Why? Because by not turning on their air defense systems, they did not allow the United States of America to conduct its suppression of enemy air defenses. And that made it very difficult for the US and NATO to then fly their low-altitude platforms such as Apaches and Warhogs to take out the Serbian military. And so NATO grew increasingly more and more frustrated by this decision by Serbia not to turn on their defense systems so they cannot be destroyed. And so they just started doing punitive air campaign for 3 months. Wesley Clark, famously, the general in charge of this, said, I think verbatim, basically, like, we're going to bomb Serbia into medieval age. During those 3 months, I just want to make one thing clear for everyone listening to this. Everyone in the country was on the same side, like liberal, pro-democracy, pro-Europe. The whole country rallied around screw NATO. But then in 2000, so some 18 months later, when there was an election that Milosevic lost, and he tried to steal it as he kind of did before, there was finally a revolt. And there you go. Boom, regime change. Milosevic was packed up by the new government into a Learjet and shipped to The Hague. And honestly, I think maybe 3 people died in that revolution. It was very bloodless. It was it's the perfect scenario, by the way, that the West dreams of. Not a single American soldier was committed to this regime change. The country was pounded into the medieval age. To this day, Serbia suffers from that NATO airstrike. It's the greatest military alliance in history, bombing you for 3 months. So that was obviously unfortunate for the country, but the regime change was smooth. The difference, though, I would say, Jacob, is that Milosevic never had a history of shooting people in the streets. He really didn't. For all his faults, and there are many, he never turned guns on the people in the streets of Serbia, ever. They protested all the time, by the way. People did not like him, especially in the liberal centers of the country, the capital city, Belgrade. The difference is that Iran has done this many times. 2009, Green Revolution, didn't care, shot people in the streets. 2019, didn't care, shot people in the streets. 2022, didn't care. So I think it's a little bit different, but yes, that would be the scenario. The argument here would be the people turn against the regime in the way that you've pointed, but I do think it would require restraint because there's a fine balance. So how many civilians died during the 3 months of NATO bombing of Serbia? If we take Serbian numbers, let's say, let's give it to them. It's about 3,000, I think. 3,000 in 3 months. In other words, this was a carpet bombing of civilian centers. So if the US and Israel want regime change in Iran, they kind of have to tone it down. Because the more it goes on, there is a risk. There's 2 pathways, or maybe 3. One pathway is Iran just stays Iran. One pathway is 18 months from now, Iran goes the Serbian route and you have this revolt. But there is a pathway where it just goes North Korea. And so that's why the danger is that too much violence imposed on the country from above, I don't think that leads to a revolt against the regime. It could very well empower the regime to become more brutal and empower the supporters of the regime to paint anyone who opposes it as traitors. Because, if women and children start dying from Israeli bombs and American bombs, it's going to be very difficult for anyone who wants regime change to claim that they are on the correct side.